Last week we were talking about giving, about dana, in the context of Dogen's Bodaisatta Shishobo, these 4 methods of a bodhisattva. And one of the things that kept arising was this question of how much is too much. Right? What if we overdo it? I've been thinking about that all week. What comes to mind for me is how about 15 years ago I moved to Anchorage to be part of the Anchorage Zen community. I was fresh out of the monastery. I had been living that life and following that schedule where there are no demands except to give yourself completely to whatever you're doing. So if you're chopping wood, you're really chopping wood. And if you're offering incense, you're really offering incense. And there's nothing else that could be done. There's no job that you have to do to make it all work. That is your job. And there's no family there to split your time. You're just doing this job 24/7. It's a very particular kind of mindset. And when I came to Anchorage, I had the idea that I really wanted to maintain that mind. And I said at the time that I really wanted to explore what it meant to say yes to everything. So that's what I did. I just said yes to everything. Anything anyone wanted me to do, I did it. If someone wanted to talk to me in the middle of the night, okay. If someone wanted me to visit their class, okay. If someone wanted to meet with me at a coffee shop, okay. And honestly, I loved that. I loved that way of being. I loved that whenever a phone call came, whenever an email came, whenever someone came to the door, I had already decided that I wasn't going to negotiate, that I wasn't going to look at my schedule and see, well, is this too much? I was just going to do it. So I did that. And I did it for a few years. And then our son was born. And I tried to keep doing it. But I wasn't sleeping anymore because we had this baby. And I had this other life now that wasn't just about the community. It wasn't just about my role as a priest. It was about this beautiful baby boy. And I was putting a lot of energy toward that at the same time that I was trying to maintain all this energy for everything else. And what happened was I started to kind of lose my capacity to be skillful. So what I remember of that time, it was about a year of being in Anchorage, that I would agree to meet someone and then I wouldn't go. Not because I didn't want to go, but because I just couldn't remember. Or one night I remember in particular, people came to the door because we lived in the Zendo. They knocked on the door, I opened the door, they looked like they were supposed to be there. I didn't understand why. And they had to explain to me that that night was when I teach people Zazen. I said, oh, right. I stopped being able to hold all the things that I was trying to offer. It became a mush. And then we moved back to Japan, and finally our daughter was born. And when our daughter was born, I realized I had to change the way that I was doing things. I wasn't benefiting. Instead of benefiting everyone, I wasn't really benefiting anyone. I was showing up halfway at best to everything because I felt that giving had to have a particular shape. It had to look like this constant, unending, bottomless yes. I couldn't do it. It was very hard for me. It was very hard for me to admit that I couldn't be that aspirational version of myself. It was beyond my capacity. At the same time, when I finally started to change the way I was doing things, when I finally started to say no, I was able to give more when I was giving. Now, everything I'm saying is just common sense, in a way. And I don't say it because there's an answer in there exactly. I say it because I think this is one example of what it looks like to negotiate this tension that we feel when we hear teachings about giving in such a profound way. We have to figure out what that is. I can't tell you what that is. I can say, maybe it's this. Maybe it's this. I can say, watch out for this. But it doesn't have just one shape. So I want to read a little bit more tonight from this section on giving. It's the longest section of the text, and see what pops up. The Buddha said, "When a person who practices dana comes into an assembly, other people watch that person with admiration. We should know that the mind of such a person quietly reaches others." There's nothing more to be said about that. All of you have the experience of being in the presence of people who are generous and knowing what it feels like, how it can be inspiring, how it can be challenging, how it can be moving to be near someone who is so clearly invested in giving, truly giving. And you all also have the experience of being in the presence of someone who isn't. That's probably most of the time. Maybe you have the experience of being in the presence of both at the same time. And that juxtaposition is so profound. You can see so clearly two different ways of living. And there's no question how each one is affecting you, how each one is affecting the room, how each one is affecting the world. So Dogen's saying something very obvious here. And then he continues. Even if we offer just one word or a verse of Dharma, it will become a seed of goodness in this lifetime and other lives to come. Even if we give something humble, a single penny or a stalk of grass, it will plant a root of goodness in this and other ages. And then he says something really interesting. He says, Dharma can be a material treasure, and a material treasure can be Dharma. This depends entirely upon the giver's vow and wish. Dharma can be a material treasure, and a material treasure can be Dharma. That's a very poetic way of saying we don't have to fall into the abstraction of this. Let giving be giving in a concrete sense. When you give someone an object, when you hand someone something, when you help someone stand up, that physical act of giving is the Dharma. It can be. I don't know if we need to distinguish between can be and is. We can get stuck in a teaching like this because there's this idea of giving the Dharma, of offering the Dharma. And what do we imagine? If you're like me, you imagine someone sitting on the Dharma throne, expounding, and that's a gift. Probably rarely true. The Dharma that we're talking about here is much more mundane. It's much more immediate. It's Dharma that doesn't smell like Dharma. It's just lending a hand. Offering his beard is a great story. A Chinese emperor cured his minister's illness. Okay. So this is a story, I don't know the origin, in which some minister to an emperor was sick, and the physician, the court physician, had a kind of medicine that he wanted to make, a concoction, but it needed hair. That was one of the ingredients. And the emperor, upon hearing this, chopped off his beard and gave it to him. We talked last week about the idea that you can't give something that you think is yours. And what I love about this story is that we can see so clearly what happens. Here's the emperor, looking like an emperor. And that includes this beard. It gives him gravity, it gives him stature. And then he hears that if he just cut it off, it could save a life. And he realizes as he hears that, oh, now that I know that, I know that this isn't mine. Here. We can see this now. We can see this in the era of COVID. We are invited to question what is ours. Our comfort, our convenience. Is it ours? So many people have realized in the last year that if wearing a mask, if staying home, if making those choices, which are uncomfortable choices, which are inconvenient choices, if those things might save a life, then they aren't really ours to keep. My comfort on that level is no longer mine. When I know the stakes, and so I can let it go. I want to take a trip somewhere. It's fine to want that. We've all been challenged with the question, is this really yours to do? If the consequences matter so much. This applies to everything. Right? We can think about this in terms of how we consume things. We can think about this in terms of how we recycle things. Once we know the effects of a thing, we have to ask ourselves if that's something we can still keep now that we know. Dogen gives another story. He says, offering sand, a child gained the throne. This is a story about King Ashoka. King Ashoka was the Indian king who, more than anyone in history, really disseminated Buddhism throughout India and beyond the borders of India. He became the ultimate advocate of Buddhism. And the story goes that one day a child on the road meeting the Buddha was so moved by the Buddha, but had nothing to offer in a material sense. He was poor. He had nothing. And so he made an offering of a grain of sand. This is beautiful, and it sounds so apocryphal, but it's also the kind of thing a kid would do, which makes it lovely. And the Buddha saw this, and the Buddha said, one day, this child will become a king. It's a good story. These people did not covet rewards from others. The emperor wasn't looking to get credit. This boy wasn't trying to become something else. They simply shared what they had according to their ability. There was something in their hand and they were able to let it go. When we understand, oh sorry, I skipped a part. To launch a boat or build a bridge is the practice of dana paramita. When we understand the meaning of dana, receiving a body and giving up a body are both offerings. So now Dogen is slipping into Dogenese. He's starting to talk about everything that doesn't feel like giving. Just launching a boat into the world. That volition, if we make it offering, becomes offering. Being born, he's saying, is a kind of giving. Dying is a kind of giving. Earning a livelihood and managing a business are nothing other than giving. Trusting flowers to the wind and trusting birds to the season may also be the meritorious action of dana. Just doing what you do but with this mind of offering, of constantly letting go. Trust is a really interesting word here. Because trust, in a way, is the absence of control. When we let go of that control, we're letting go. And letting go is a kind of giving. Maybe not what we always picture, but a kind. And I think it's noteworthy that in these, he's not talking about people who are giving everything in the sense of something that's total. You know, we have these stories in the Jataka tales, for example, the stories of the Buddha's life before he was the Buddha, in which, in one, he sees a starving tigress who's trying to feed her cubs and can't because she's so weak. And so he just cuts himself open and feeds himself to her. There's that kind of generosity. He's not talking about that. That's beautiful too. That's part of this story. But he's talking about what is right in your hand. The emperor has a beard. Gone. The child needs to offer something in that moment. What's in front of him? A grain of sand. Go. You look up at the sky and you see a bird. In that moment, what can you offer? The bird. When we give and when we receive, we should study this principle. Great King Ashoka's offering of half a mango to hundreds of monks was a boundless offering. So now we have a story even before King Ashoka's life as King Ashoka. And now we have the story that comes at the end, which is that after a lifetime of promoting Buddhism, he had given away everything. Everything. He was left with nothing except half a mango. And there he was in the presence of the Buddha and his assembly with half a mango in his hand. And so he gave it to them. And the story goes that that mango, this is very biblical, fed all of them. That it was enough. He looked and he saw what was in his hand and he saw this too is something he can give. Again, it's a beautiful story. And it's fun to imagine that there's this magical moment in which this half a mango fed the entire Sangha of hundreds. But we can also be more practical about this story and say, no, it didn't. Of course it didn't. That doesn't make it less of an offering. It doesn't mean it wasn't complete. Not only should we urge ourselves to make offerings, but we must not overlook any opportunity to practice dana. We must not overlook any opportunity to practice dana. And so this becomes something like breathing out, which is itself an act of release and therefore is itself an act of offering. All we have to do is push. When you see a car drive by, you can offer the car. You can offer well-being to the driver. You can offer the tree that you see. You can offer the sound that you hear. We can keep this in this very kind of beautiful abstract place, and that's good enough. But we can also be practical again about why we do this. Why would you develop this habit? Why would you develop this muscle of offering, or if you're more cynical, of imagining that you're offering everything in every moment? Why would I give away something that I don't have? So that when I do have something, I'm able to give that. It's that simple. We do this all the time in ways that may or may not have measurable consequences. In ways that may or may not feel real, especially at the start. We do it all the time so that we develop this feeling of letting go. So that in the moment when we can offer something that genuinely helps, so that we can offer what is needed, so that in that moment, that critical moment, we don't tighten our fist. We just default to giving absolutely everything away in every moment, with every breath. What a beautiful way to live. I'll stop there.